When my daughter got married, I didn't tell her that I had inherited $9 million from her grandfather. Thank God I kept my mouth shut. At the time, I told myself it was humility, old habits from a lifetime of living modestly. I had spent decades as a quiet, practical engineer in a small Midwestern city, raising my daughter alone after her mother died. I didn't believe in flashing money or advertising security. I believed in showing up, paying bills on time, and keeping your word. But a week after the wedding, I understood the real reason my silence mattered. I was standing in my living room, coffee cooling on the table, when the doorbell rang. Not a polite ring, a sharp, impatient press. Through the frosted glass I saw two silhouettes, one tall and rigid, the other shorter, holding a leather folder. When I opened the door, my new son-in-law stepped forward without greeting me. His smile was thin, rehearsed, the kind people use when they think they already own the room. Beside him stood a man in a cheap suit, holding a notary stamp like a badge. "We need to clear up some paperwork," my son-in-law said. "Family assets. Shouldn't take long." That was the moment everything inside me went still. Not angry, not shocked, just clear. Because a man doesn't show up with a notary unless he believes something is already his. I invited them in. I listened as my son-in-law talked about marriage, entitlement, and what he called fair distribution. He spoke as if my life had been a placeholder, as if my years of sacrifice were merely a bridge he had crossed without noticing. He had no idea who he was dealing with. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 2 months earlier my father had passed away quietly at 80. And in his will, after a lifetime of careful investments and silence, he left me $9 million. No trusts in my daughter's name, no shared ownership, no loopholes, just me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't correct a single assumption. I smiled, because when someone reveals their greed that clearly, you don't interrupt them. You let them finish. You let them believe they are winning. Outside, winter pressed against the windows of my modest house. Inside, my son-in-law was already reaching for things that were never his. And for the first time since my daughter's wedding, I knew something with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about money. This was about betrayal. And betrayal always comes with consequences. I didn't raise my daughter in comfort. I raised her in responsibility. After her mother died, everything changed overnight. One day I was a husband with plans. The next, I was a widower with a 6-year-old girl who woke up screaming from nightmares and asked questions I didn't know how to answer. I was still working full-time as a mechanical engineer back then, earning a decent living, but nothing extravagant. No inheritance, no safety net. Just a steady paycheck and a child who depended on me for everything. I turned down promotions that required travel. I switched to early shifts so I could pick her up from school. I retired earlier than I should have, knowing it meant a smaller pension, because being present mattered more than money. Every decision I made for the next 25 years had one filter. Will this keep her safe? We lived in the same modest house in Sioux City for decades. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a furnace that rattled every winter. I drove the same sedan for 13 years. I didn't upgrade phones. I didn't take vacations unless they were within driving distance. Every extra dollar went into her future. College alone cost me $142,000. Tuition, housing, books, meal plans. I paid every semester in full so she wouldn't start her adult life buried in debt. When she needed a car after graduation, I put down $18,500 in cash so her monthly payments stayed low. When she moved into her first apartment, I covered the security deposit, first and last month's rent, and basic furniture, another $22,000 over time. I never once asked for repayment. I never reminded her of the numbers. That's not what fathers do. My own father, her grandfather, helped when things were tight, but even he was discreet. He was a quiet man who believed real wealth was invisible. While I was raising my daughter, he was investing. Small commercial properties, long-term holdings, conservative moves. He never talked about it at family dinners, never boasted, never hinted. All he ever told me was this: protect your blood, and never confuse love with permission. When he passed away, I learned what he'd built. $9 million. Clean, legal, carefully structured. He left it all to me, not out of favoritism, but out of trust. He knew I wouldn't waste it. He knew I wouldn't let it become bait for the wrong people. That inheritance came after my daughter got engaged. I didn't tell her. Not because I didn't love her, but because something already felt wrong. Her fiancé talked a lot about money, about growth, about leverage. He asked questions that didn't sound like curiosity. They sounded like inventory. He dismissed my career as stable but small. He joked about moving up in life, and I noticed how often he talked about what he deserved. So I stayed silent. I paid for what I always paid for. I smiled at the wedding. I gave the toast. I played my role as the simple, supportive father with nothing extra to offer but love. And that silence, the one choice I made that went against every instinct to provide, was the thing that saved us both. Because everything I sacrificed to raise my daughter had taught me one final lesson. The people who truly love you never rush to claim what isn't theirs. The change didn't happen all at once. It never does. At first, it was small things, things I told myself didn't matter. My daughter stopped calling every evening like she used to. Sunday dinners became too busy. When she did come by, her phone never left her hand. Her laughter sounded forced, like she was performing happiness instead of living it. Her fiancé was always there, always listening, always correcting. If I mentioned something practical, budgets, timelines, long-term planning, he'd smile politely and say things like, "That's old school thinking," or "We're playing a bigger game now." Once, over dinner, he laughed and said, "You worked hard, no doubt, but ambition matters more these days." My daughter didn't laugh. She didn't disagree either. That silence hurt more than the comment. Then came the questions. Casual at first. "So, did Grandpa ever invest in real estate? Did you ever think about selling the house? Do you have everything organized legally? You know, wills and stuff?" Always framed as concern, always followed by a smile. His mother was worse. She visited once before the wedding, walked through my house like an inspector, eyes lingering on furniture, on walls, on what wasn't there. She complimented my daughter loudly and spoke to me slowly, like I might miss something important. At lunch, she said, "Marriage is about building security. Young people shouldn't start from nothing." Her gaze lingered on me when she said it. I noticed how often money came up after that. Not bills, not responsibility. Potential. What my daughter could have, what she deserved, what her life should look like. My daughter started repeating phrases that weren't hers. "Eric says I shouldn't think small. Eric thinks stability is overrated. Eric says love means trusting him completely. Trusting him meant questioning me. She rolled her eyes when I talked about caution. She accused me of being controlling when I asked reasonable questions. When I warned her about rushing into marriage, she snapped, "You don't understand this world anymore." That one stayed with me. I understood enough to see what was happening. Slowly, methodically, I was being repositioned, not as her father, not as her protector, but as an obstacle. Still, I said nothing. I didn't confront him. I didn't defend myself. I watched. I listened. I waited. Because when entitlement starts to surface, it always exposes itself fully if you give it time. And deep down, I already knew. This wasn't love pulling my daughter away from me. This was greed learning how to speak in someone else's voice. The betrayal didn't come with shouting. It came with paperwork. A week after the wedding, my daughter called me late at night. Her voice wasn't angry. It was hollow. The kind of sound you hear when someone has just realized their life is not what they thought it was. "Dad," she said, barely above a whisper, "can you come get me?" I drove through freezing rain to their house. When I arrived, she was standing on the porch with 2 suitcases, mascara streaked down her face, wedding ring already off her finger. The lights inside were off. He wasn't home. In the car, she told me everything. He had been cheating. Not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness. An ongoing affair that started before the wedding. When she confronted him, he didn't apologize. He handed her divorce papers, already prepared, already signed on his side. But that wasn't the worst part. He had hidden documents in his desk, drafts, transfers, legal language she didn't understand, references to asset protection and future claims. When she asked what it meant, he laughed and said she wouldn't need to worry about it much longer. That night, he showed up at my house. No warning, no shame. He stood in my driveway yelling my daughter's name like he still owned her. When I told him to leave, he leaned close and said something I will never forget. "You should have told us what you really had." My mother knows how these things work. Well, find it. That was the moment. Not when he cheated, not when he humiliated my daughter, but when he assumed my life was something he could audit. I didn't threaten him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told him to leave and never come back. He laughed and said lawyers would handle it. The next morning, my daughter showed me the full extent of it. A notary, forged signatures, backdated documents, a plan to claim assets through marriage that didn't even exist. They weren't reacting emotionally. They were executing a strategy. That was when the last piece fell into place. This wasn't a bad marriage. This wasn't even a bad man. This was a calculated betrayal. And once I understood that, my role changed. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the man standing between my daughter and people who believed love was a transaction and inheritance was a shortcut. And I was done being underestimated. The night after my daughter came home, neither of us slept. She sat at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of cold tea, still wearing the same clothes she had fled in. I watched her the way I used to when she was little and sick, counting breaths, listening for reassurance that she was still here. But this wasn't a fever. This was reality. At dawn, I understood something with absolute clarity. Love without boundaries is not love. It is permission. I had spent my entire adult life protecting my daughter from the world. Now I had to protect her from people who had entered her life pretending to love her. That morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney I trusted, someone I had known for years, someone who didn't posture or overpromise. When I explained what had happened, he didn't gasp or interrupt. He just said, "Bring everything, and don't tell them anything." The second call was harder. A private investigator, former federal, quiet reputation. Expensive. When he asked what I needed, I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about truth. "I need to know who my daughter married," I said, "and I need proof that can stand up in court." He paused, then replied, "Then you did the right thing calling me." The third call was the most important and the most restrained. I called my banker, not to move money, not to reveal anything, only to make sure every single detail of my father's estate remained sealed, private, and legally insulated. No leaks, no casual confirmations, no assumptions. By the time the sun came up, I had stopped reacting. I was planning. My daughter apologized that afternoon, over and over, for not listening, for choosing him, for doubting me. I told her the truth. "I didn't fail you," I said. "I trusted you. And now we'll fix what trust couldn't." That was the moment she stopped being a girl who made a mistake and became a woman facing consequences. And that was the moment I stopped being the quiet, underestimated father everyone thought they could step over, because the people who came after us believed strength was loud. They had no idea how dangerous silence could be when it finally moved. The most dangerous thing I did was nothing. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. No angry phone calls, no public accusations, no warnings. While my son-in-law and his mother grew louder, I became invisible. The investigator worked quietly. No surprises, no shortcuts, just facts. Bank records, hotel receipts, messages he thought were deleted, meetings he assumed were private. Patterns don't lie, and greedy people repeat themselves. What we uncovered was worse than I expected. He hadn't married my daughter for love. He had married her for access, not to money he knew existed, but to money he believed must exist. He and his mother had already contacted a notary before the wedding. They had drafted documents based on assumptions, not assets. They planned to pressure, confuse, and exhaust her into compliance. All of it depended on one thing: that I would panic, that I would reveal something, that I would try to prove I wasn't small. I did none of that. Every night, my daughter and I sat at the kitchen table reviewing what we had. She learned more about contracts, financial boundaries, and manipulation in 2 weeks than most people learn in a lifetime. It was painful, necessary, permanent. I changed nothing publicly. Same house, same car, same quiet routine. Meanwhile, my attorney prepared filings designed to make them overconfident. Delays, procedural patience, letting them believe they were in control. They mistook silence for weakness. They mistook modesty for lack. My son-in-law escalated. He sent threats through lawyers. He spread rumors. He demanded settlements based on imaginary wealth. His mother spoke loudly in social circles about protecting family assets. They were playing chess loudly. I was waiting for them to overextend, because when someone is desperate to seize something, they eventually leave fingerprints everywhere. And when they did, I was ready. Confidence is dangerous when it isn't earned. As weeks passed, my son-in-law stopped pretending. His messages became shorter, sharper. His lawyer's letters grew more aggressive, filled with bold claims and thin threats. He demanded settlements based on assets that existed only in his imagination. He thought pressure would force me to talk. He thought shame would make my daughter fold. His mother was even louder. She told anyone who would listen that her son was being financially abused, that my daughter had run back to her father because she couldn't handle adult responsibility, that they were simply trying to protect what was rightfully theirs. Rightfully, a word greedy people love. They assumed I was cornered. A retired man living modestly, no leverage, no appetite for a long legal fight. They bragged about connections, about top-tier attorneys, about dragging things out until we broke. They mistook patience for fear. At one point, my son-in-law showed up unannounced again, standing at the end of my driveway like a man rehearsing a victory speech. He smiled and said, "You should settle. Court gets expensive, especially when you don't have much." I nodded, calm, polite. Inside, I noted the date, the time, the exact phrasing, because arrogance makes people careless. They filed documents too early, claimed rights they couldn't prove, referenced assets they couldn't legally name. Each move revealed more of their hand. Each demand exposed how little they actually understood about the law and about me. My daughter watched it unfold with growing clarity. She stopped crying, stopped apologizing, stopped doubting herself. She saw him for what he was. And as his confidence grew, so did his mistakes. Because people who believe they are entitled to something always assume the world will bend before it asks for proof. They never see the moment coming when the floor disappears. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not physically, emotionally. Cold enough that every lie felt exposed the moment it left someone's mouth. My son-in-law sat at the opposite table in a tailored suit that tried too hard. His confidence was still there, but it had thinned. His mother sat beside him, rigid, lips pressed tight, eyes scanning the room like she was already calculating damage control. They thought this was still a negotiation. They were wrong. The first witness was the notary, a small man with a nervous twitch in his jaw and hands that wouldn't stay still. He testified about documents he claimed were signed willingly, about dates he recited from memory. His voice was steady for exactly 4 minutes. Then my attorney stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She asked questions, simple ones. Were you licensed on the date you claim this document was notarized? Can you explain this bank transfer made to your account 3 days prior? Is this your voice on this recording? The room changed. The audio played. Clear, unmistakable. The sound of money being discussed like a favor. The sound of a signature being promised like a commodity. The notary didn't answer the last question. He didn't need to. My son-in-law leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney. His mother's composure cracked for the first time. Her fingers dug into her purse as if it might ground her. Then came the financial records, email chains, backdated drafts, messages discussing securing assets through marriage. Not assets they owned, assets they assumed existed. The judge read quietly, slowly, with the kind of patience that terrifies guilty people. When she looked up, her expression was no longer neutral. "This court does not tolerate fraud," she said, "and it does not reward entitlement." For the first time, my son-in-law looked at me directly, not with arrogance, not with anger, with fear. Because in that moment, he realized something that no threat or rumor could undo. I had never been hiding from them. I had been waiting. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It unraveled, piece by piece, lie by lie. After the notary's testimony fell apart, the courtroom shifted from tense to suffocating. The judge asked for a recess, not for them, but to review the evidence in full. When she returned, the air felt heavier, like gravity itself had increased. My son-in-law's attorney tried to recover. He argued misunderstanding, poor judgment, emotional stress. He suggested that intentions mattered more than actions. The judge shut that down immediately. Intent is exactly what matters here, she said, and intent is proven by preparation. Then she addressed the forged documents. Invalid, stricken, referred for criminal review. The words landed like blunt force. My son-in-law stood up without permission, voice raised, insisting this was all exaggerated, that my daughter was unstable, manipulated by me. The judge ordered him to sit. He didn't. That was his final mistake. Contempt of court was noted. His attorney's shoulders slumped. His mother whispered urgently, but the damage was irreversible. The judge turned to my daughter. "Do you wish to proceed with dissolution under fault?" She didn't hesitate. Yes. The ruling was clear. The marriage was dissolved. No asset claims granted. No compensation awarded. Legal costs assigned to the respondent. But the worst part for him wasn't the divorce. It was what came next. The judge formally referred the case to the district attorney for investigation into fraud, conspiracy, and bribery. The notary was escorted out by court security. His mother's face went pale, the certainty draining from her eyes. My son-in-law looked around the courtroom like someone waking up in a burning house. He had gambled everything on assumptions, that I was weak, that I was hiding something out of shame, that silence meant submission. Instead, silence had been preparation. As we left the courtroom, my daughter held her head high. She didn't look back. Neither did I. Some lessons are expensive. Others cost you everything. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly when the noise finally stops. After the court proceedings ended, my daughter and I returned to the same modest house we had always lived in. Same walls, same furniture, same routines. But something fundamental had changed. She slept through the night again. So did I. A week later, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window like it always had. There were no lawyers present, no documents, just the two of us. That was when I finally opened the lot box. I placed the papers on the table and watched her eyes widen as she read the numbers. $9 million. Her grandfather's life's work, quietly built, carefully protected. She didn't smile. She cried, not because of the money, but because she finally understood what had been shielding her all along. "You knew," she said softly. "You knew they were after something." "I suspected," I replied, and I trusted silence more than explanations. Her grandfather's note was still clipped to the file, written in steady handwriting. "Use this to protect, not to impress." That inheritance didn't change our lifestyle overnight. It didn't need to. What it changed was the future. My daughter enrolled in financial planning courses. She learned how contracts work, how manipulation sounds when it's dressed up as love. She learned that independence isn't about marrying ambition. It's about standing on your own judgment. As for me, I remained exactly who I had always been: a father, a guardian. A man who learned that kindness without boundaries is weakness. The people who tried to take from us disappeared quietly. Lawsuits faded. Rumors died when truth stood still long enough. Greed has a short memory when there's nothing left to grab. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is refusing to show your hand. And sometimes the greatest inheritance you can pass down isn't money at all. It's discernment.